In ancient times, there lived a witch who slept in a thorn forest for about 1,000 years. But one day, her peace was disturbed by a golden-haired prince who found her and saved her. The only problem was that the prince was too young. She did not see a solution to this problem, except to take the boy under her wing. The idyll lasted until the boy was 15 years old. Then the witch left him, falling into a deep sleep again. The prince wandered through the forest for a long time to find this witch and her house. But after gaining great strength and power, he fought his way through thorn vines, fighting monsters. He traveled all this long way just to find the castle where the witch fell asleep. And after finding what he wanted, he was enveloped in true happiness, which he did not know he had. Happiness so consumed him that he could not refrain from setting fire to the house and the forest together. And after the witch was left without a house and her forest, the prince proposed to her. The children's fairy tale, which depicted these events on its pages, has come to an end, which was read by a boy who looked like a prince from a fairy tale to a girl who looked like a witch. The silence did not last long, because the witch girl's mouth opened to ask the prince if this story was true. Her name was Ariel, but in fact, in the eyes of the boy in front of her, she was the same witch. The prince's love for Ariel was so boundless that it could be compared to hatred. Rickert Cedric von Delium was not an ordinary prince from a fairy tale, because he currently held the status of Emperor of Elysium. In retrospect, he was the same prince raised by a witch, Ariel Ascheld. Louise Arundel, in turn, was the same witch who raised the prince. They could not choose one of the two offers. However, if they could pretend to love each other, Ariel wanted to make sure they could live happily ever after. Frankly, Rickert admitted that he could not guarantee that the process would be to the witch's liking. But still, he had to make every effort to achieve his final goal. Still, the witch asked him for a more elaborate and clearer answer, relying on the fact that the process was no less important. Changing to a raised tone, she asked the emperor to tell her exactly what he was planning. Asking what the girl had, if she really wanted to know everything, he was also no less curious why she was so interested in it. Even at the request of the girl, his answers did not become more clear and understandable for her. He only offered to wait and see all his implemented plans with his own eyes. Well, it was so that Ariel didn't have to think about how it all happened before, but now that was what worried her the most. She spent her whole life in the eastern part of the monster forest, in a cozy and precious area, until the emperor came to wake her up and take her away. It was even strange for her that the child who came to pick her up was already the complete ruler of the country. But when she finally got out into the outside world, she realized that a whole 1,000 years had passed. Everything she saw in front of her was foreign to her, so she looked at it all with a bit of excitement. Before she had time to get used to the new world, the emperor had already dragged the witch to his palace. Her appearance caused real indignation because for representatives of the nobility, she was a clumsy girl who lived on the border of the country. Ariel herself had to hear these conversations because of their volume. She really was in this world for a short time, so she didn't understand all its intricacies, and maybe that's why she's a fool for asking questions. And in addition to her origin, the girl was also illiterate, which was also discussed by people from high society. They were outraged that Ariel got to the emperor's palace without even being able to read. Trying to restrain herself with her last strength, the girl considered it unfair. She was an unusual illiterate girl, and the Princess Ascheld herself, a great sorceress of the Kingdom of Arundel. Calling the girl illiterate, representatives of high society only spread false rumors because their system of writing was significantly different from the one that Ariel knew. Through us, the girl was pulled out of her thoughts by an unknown person who was carrying books in his hands, informing that he was currently carrying something fragile. A woman with papers was standing at some distance from Ariel, to whom the stranger was approaching. They both talked about cultural values. Their previous location was in the Forest of Monsters, but with grief in half, they were able to evacuate them. With one big ear, the women began to talk about the Forest of Monsters, or rather, her home. Unexpectedly, one of the books accidentally fell from the man's hands to the floor, unfolding. Having just seen it only out of the corner of her eye, the girl recognized the familiar symbols that belonged to the Kingdom of Arundel. Picking up the book, one of them could have missed that there was ancient magic hidden among all these symbols. While they were discussing what exactly they planned to do with this book and what experiments to send it to, the girl began to remember. The written pages seemed very familiar to her, but she missed that this book used to be kept on the shelves in her hut. But later, she was able to recognize in this book her diary, which she kept at the age of 15. Rushing closer to the diary, she began to interfere with everyone in front of her, blocking their path. But the final one was stopped, recognizing in her the same illiterate guest that His Highness had brought to the palace years ago, but that negated the fact that the princess of the Wizarding Kingdom was now in front of them. But the main problem lay in the diary, which hides a secret past that the girl did not even want to mention. Readers immediately recognized in one ancient symbol the meaning of the great sorceress Asheld, and began to rejoice in her impeccable handwriting. As they continued to praise her records, which Ariel herself could not decipher, they made her even more nervous and reminisce about the darkest corners of her past. She wished she knew exactly where it all went to shit, but the only thing she could guess was that it all started about 15 years ago, while she was busy with her most important thing, namely sleep. But during this rather deep sleep in front of her, she saw a light coming from the open door. Reacting to this, Ariel slowly began to open her eyes, trying to recognize the uninvited guest. The first thing that caught her eye was her bright golden hair, which shone as if it were the source of the sun. And after the bright shine from her hair, she was able to focus her gaze on a complete picture, concluding that an angel is in front of her. He started the conversation first, surprised that the girl in front of him was alive. The whole angelic nature of this child was instantly destroyed when the girl felt a sharp blade near her throat. Without removing it, the boy in front of her announced that he was interested to know if she would wake up from the pain. Revealing all the hidden cards, the witch said that such an action would definitely not wake her up, because then she would definitely fall into a dead sleep. It was from this moment that the story of their fairy tale could be considered to have begun. The blonde-haired, blue-eyed child started all by herself, interrupting Ariel's sleep. The eastern forest is full of thorn bushes and monster trees. Within this forest, time moves much more slowly, so it is often called the Eastern Forest, where time stands still. Ariel Asheld Louise Arundel spent many lonely years in this forest, the entrance to which was strictly forbidden to outsiders. There was a seal on it that kept her imprisoned for more than 100 years. The only thing that saved her from this prison was uninterrupted sleep. She woke up every time the seal of the forest began to weaken. Her awakening time was short, so she did not have time to feel alone. After waking up, she had many things to do, which included checking the magic circle, and also to seal the portal to the forest, because if this seal is broken, then the portal will start letting monsters from other dimensions through. And after all the completed tasks, the girl can return to studying magic. Due to the small amount of time that she has to devote to deepening in the field of magic, she should achieve at least some kind of process. Of course, even this small amount of time she could not fully devote to studying, because she was disturbed by a knock on the door. She tried to ignore it, pretending she didn't hear anything, but to her detriment, each knock got louder, until a seemingly adorable child broke the door completely open, opening a passage for himself. The noise from it and the large amount of dust around let even the child know about it. For the blue boy, this was not a reason for surprise, and the only thing he did was rejoice. Thus, the witch's peaceful existence in the forest was destroyed by the yellowhead, who came to her prey and presented a knife to her throat. The boy was really insolent in front of the girl, so, without even apologizing for his actions, he immediately started looking at Ariel's house. His actions did not remain only the observation of all objects in the house, only his eyes, so his hands also went into action, destroying everything behind them. The witch needed an answer from the yellow-headed boy, because the question in her mind was how he was able to get to this forest. But after thinking a little, the boy refused to answer, relying on the fact that his mother did not allow him to communicate with strangers. In a moment, Ariel questioned him about his behavior with the knife, to which the boy's mouth also did not answer. Based on a rather ancient fairy tale, he reminded the witch that the sleeping princess should be awakened by the prince's kiss. But since no such action was heard from Ariel, he ventured to more brutal measures. Taking all the necessary steps to make the curse wear off, the prince concluded by informing him that it still existed. He assumed it was because Ariel was a witch. But he did not have time to say his assumption to the end, as screams began to come from the girl's lips. Peeking inside the predator, not the girl, the boy also revealed that he covered her mouth and nose as well, but eventually gave up when the girl started to turn pale. He probably would have continued if he hadn't remembered his mother's remark that killing people was not a good thing to do. He was also able to recall that he also had the thought of waking the girl up by hitting her head with a stone. But his mother's words also stopped him this time. That is why he decided to get the girl to wake up from the pain in her neck, but luckily for her, her eyes opened earlier. Repeating once again, the girl informed the boy that he should listen to his mother and not kill people, even with a dagger. Even before she had time to sigh with relief about her own awakening, which actually saved the girl's life, she could already watch how the boy ran away from her in a completely different direction from the door. She was fed up with this commotion in her house, so she wanted the boy to return to his house as soon as possible. Ashild was literally soaked. The girl was surprised that the prince was able to feel her magic, because, as she thought before, it was impossible. Approaching the boy, the sorceress asked him how exactly he knew about Ashild and her magic. Even then, she perfectly understood that many years had passed in the outside world, about 100, and in such a time all traces should have disappeared, and with it all knowledge. In a moment, the boy explained that he learned about it thanks to ancient ruins and magical artifacts. Also, his attention was drawn to magic circles, which were filled with the same power of Ashild. The girl was not even going to at least try to keep up with the young prince when he jumped out into the yard through the window. Wrapping himself in magic, he gleefully announced that it was widespread within this forest. He asked the witches if the magic of the parable was the reason for stopping time. But this question was more rhetorical, because the girl watched with admiration as magic swirled around the child, as if welcoming a powerful sorcerer. Not much time passed, as the prince announced that he had to say goodbye to the girl as well. Standing in the center of the magic circle, the boy was about to say goodbye to the girl. In the end, he just said that there wasn't much entertainment in the place, and that he should take the toys with him next time before visiting Ariel. Suddenly, a whole aura of magic from this magic circle appeared in front of him, which teleported him home. But in fact, after a moment, the boy was no longer in the center of this circle. Only the same golden magical trail remained behind him. Continuing to stand in her previous place, the girl still couldn't understand how a child like him could use a magic circle that only first-class wizards should use. Through the interaction, the musings came to an end when she was able to let it slip that this boy was either a genius or an apprentice of a powerful sorcerer. Feeling sad, Ariel decided not to think about the boy anymore, because he doesn't come to her for a long time. But her peaceful walk home was interrupted by a screeching noise behind her. Looking around, she saw only a tree that was frozen in one position. They were not even going to change it. Changing to raised tones, the girl addressed the tree, informing that it was supposed to do its job and stop all the people trying to enter the forest. This visit of the baby was not the last. The next time, he also decided to visit an acquaintance in the house. Seeing the same broken door behind her, the girl still dared to ask the boy how he could do it. But, pointing behind his back, he told the girl that one of the guard trees had helped him. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, the boy took one of the branches of a familiar tree. Surprise really appeared on the witch's face, because the first thing she assumed was that he deliberately broke all the branches in this tree. But after a moment, the boy reported that it only caught him when It was strange that monster trees would treat an unknown boy like this, helping him. But it turned out that the tree fell in love with the boy for a rather primitive reason. Usually, they are not very friendly to other outsiders who try to enter the forest. But it is with them that they are very careful. The girl felt a large amount of magical power in him. It emitted a powerful glow that was visible to any person. But even the deep potential of the boy, which even Ariel could see, did not stop the fact that the trees were traitors. They avoided having a serious conversation with Ariel when she started arguing with them, preferring to go play with the boy instead. The little prince was surrounded by little ones, and as he walked, or rather ran, past the girl, she could see the wounds on his head and arm. In origin, these wounds were not similar to the effects of careless play. They were more like bumps or cuts, not very fresh in duration. In summary, the girl could say with confidence that the child in front of her is constantly receiving physical punishment. The clothes look quite expensive, which makes them look healthier than they are. The magic circle this boy was talking about was in a garden, so the garden itself must be the size of a large estate or residence. From which it follows that the only ones who could achieve the boy's punishment in the big house were his family and friends. Coming out of all her thoughts in a moment, the girl decided not to think about it anymore and not to create misunderstandings for no reason. Precisely because of the desire to avoid unnecessary problems for herself, the girl again began to ignore all his actions. But for reasons unknown to herself, she could not do anything about herself, continuing to look over her shoulder. The boy himself was able to notice this, claiming that their eyes met when Ariel continued to deny. She hoped that in time, as the little prince continued to grow, he would begin to forget this place little by little and eventually give her peace. Not even a day passed when the same small hand appeared on the other side of the door, pushing them forward. Of course, the appearance of Cedric did not cause the girl too powerful indignation, but still she had the same unpleasant expression on her face, which instantly changed as soon as she turned her head fully in the direction of the guest. She was able to quickly notice all the wounds that covered the boy's body, which were definitely not hidden by the clothes. From that moment on, she decided that she could no longer ignore all his wounds. Cedric was a child from the imperial palace where everyone ignored him. Passing by, even the maids did not greet him, completely forgetting about his existence. He was the son of one of the maids, who also had no place in this great house. Everyone preferred to pretend they didn't notice him. No one could even get close to the prince because his existence was nothing. The only one who still greeted Cedric was his half-brother Frederick Brian von Delium. But still, after his greeting, there was a rhetorical question about today's beatings, or rather, their place. Finishing the order on the boy's face, the girl asked him who exactly beat him, but in the moment when no answer came from his lips, she assumed it was his brother. After summarizing, she informed the girl that after all, there could be fights between brothers, but inside herself she scolded the same brother, informing her that he did not have any sense of ethics. In a moment from the boy's lips came the message that revenge would not wait, and in response to this fight, he killed his brother's horse. He explained his behavior by the fact that his half-brother continued to get him, and he wanted to kill him. But because he listened to his mother, who in turn told him not to kill, he refrained. He wanted to take revenge on his brother because Cedric was injured because of his horse. But in the end, it went to an animal that simply followed the instructions of its owner. The boy himself really felt sorry for the animal, but in this way he was able to take revenge on Brian while listening to his mother. Cedric's behavior seemed quite strange to Ashild, but she was at least pleased that he felt compassion, albeit towards a horse. He was able to take revenge, but his brother's anger will gain momentum, but he will get it even more. Maybe that's why his mother, Cedrica, warned him not to do it. It occurred to him to simply rip the eyes out of his skull, but that was also one of the prohibitions from his mother's lips. The girl perfectly understood that brothers are different, and their actions sometimes cross all boundaries. But right now, she saw a cruel child in front of her. One day, the boy heard that he had to endure until he became an adult, which is exactly what he was currently doing. In this situation, the witch was pleased, at least, that the mother seems to be a priority in the eyes of the boy, which stops him. It was obvious that his mother had put a lot of effort into his upbringing, but even that would not prevent one small mistake from writing him down in history as a thief. The detailed teachings and instructions towards her son really deserved the respect of this woman. But after asking the relevant question, "What is Cedric's mother doing now?" he answered that she died. Her last words were another admonition to her son, where she urged him not to kill people. That is why he is currently holding back, wanting to complete this request to the end. This caused even greater emotions in the girl, because the woman, even in death, tried to correct Cedric's character to the end. But at the same time, Ashild was sure that if the boy's mother had lived a little longer, her teachings would have prevented the development of bad traits in her son's character. Cedric's half-brother, by other relatives, because some of the injuries on his body were quite old. Remembering how Brian had burst into his half-brother's room, screaming that he had killed his horse and broken his leg, Cedric himself was not overly emotional. This was not enough for him, because in addition to a broken leg and a killed horse, he also wanted to see a broken head. The words did not end in the usual irritation, but in a moment, Cedric literally flew to the other side from his brother. Although limited in his own movement, this did not stop Brian from having the upper hand over his abuser. Listening on the other side of the door, the maids could only hear insults directed at Cedric, wishing him death. They began to whisper among themselves that Prince Brian should have been stopped a long time ago, but no one dared to because of his unpredictable nature. Even the fact that he beat the second prince did not become a ghost for the maids to break into the room and stop the little offender. Cedric was only the son of a useless maid and a prince only in words. He was so unwelcome in the whole palace that he only saw his own father a few times. Before completely leaving the room in which he and Cedric were staying, Brian loudly declared that the next time they met, he would definitely kill the boy. But after the voice of the other boy in the room got quieter, Cedric raised his head, asking him if his speech was finished. Horror appeared on Brian's face when the boy was able to raise his head after this. So, without wasting a second, he turned back to his half-brother, wrapping his arms tightly around his neck. After a small story from the mouth of a small guest of her hut, Ashild was able to quickly understand that the reason for his ward is his mother's origin. No one cared that he was being physically abused. The only person who was on his side died, leaving him completely alone. When asked by the girl, the boy replied that the only ones who take care of him are the maids. They always gave him clean clothes, delicious food, and other things that he needed. He considered it caring, even though it was their job. Quickly eating one of the candies the witch had recently given him, he asked for more. Choosing the next one, he praised the owner of the hut for preparing such a large number of sweets. After his tragic story, she understood why he stayed in this forest for so long and always came back to play. She could only imagine how he lived in a huge apartment, and among a large number of people, he was not noticed. In his place, she would also run to this forest to gain strength and endure loneliness within the confines of the residence. Only by going to the forest can he show true happiness on his face, for which he will not be punished, and continue to spin past the feet of an almost unknown person. The sweets quickly melted on his hand, and now his hands were free, so he proceeded to remove all the plasters from his face. Looking around the boy's face, there really was almost no damage left on him. Continuing to examine his body, the boy concluded that the witch in front of him was also good at medicine. But to the last phrase of the boy, the girl reacted violently, informing that she is not a witch. Then a relevant question came out of his mouth, the content of which was that he wanted to know who the girl in front of him really was. But staying within the forest for hundreds of years, the girl did not even think about making excuses about who she really is. But in a moment, she still decided to simply introduce herself to Ariel without indicating her magical abilities. Averting his confused gaze, the boy revealed that the girl could also address him as Cedric or use his mother's imagination and call him Sadie. She agreed as a smile appeared on her face, and she informed that from now on, this house could come here to play for an unlimited amount of time. Continuing not to remove the embarrassment from his face, the boy noticed that the girl was now also smiling in his direction without objection. Not much has changed since that day, because Sadie came to the forest to have fun alone. VC also continued to come to the girl with injuries, reporting that they were minor. It already predicted that this life with the child was temporary, and very soon this fleeting moment would end. She anticipated that the child would grow up and gradually begin to lose interest in this place, which would lead to the fact that he would never return. So the girl was willing to tolerate the boy's rather active behavior until that moment came. She couldn't help Cedric's wounds, but she could apply medicine at will to make them heal faster. She wished he wouldn't feel the pain of whatever wound he got, a little work from Ariel to keep going and playing. She thought she could take care of him in any situation without harming either of them. However, her expectations were not fulfilled when the boy visited her again one day. But despite all the expectations of seeing a bright boy in front of her, with the same brilliant smile, she saw a completely different person in front of her. The trace of the previous child was completely gone, but now she was standing in front of a simply cruel person. A whole bunch of questions flashed through the girl's head as soon as she saw the boy. However, she began her series of questions, starting with where the large amount of blood all over the boy's body came from, to which he replied that it wasn't his. As he continued to search for food, he seemed oblivious to the completely confused expression on Ariel's face in front of him. In a moment, however, the girl's question was answered, and Cedric replied that it was all a result of Brian. And then the girl could not help but assume that it was Cedric's half-brother who was able to behave so cruelly towards the boy, dousing him with blood. Continuing, Cedric told the owner of the cabin that it was Brian's fault for bragging about his new horse. Now it started with Brian pulling Cedric out of his usual walk by showing off his new horse and mockingly asking his half-brother if that horse was going to be dead as well. Unexpected men who were standing next to Brian and his horse began to stop the boy, relying on the fact that the animal was not yet trained. But then an exaggerated smile appeared on the face of the little offender when he already had a whip in his hands. The look of the horse in the direction of the boy seemed really creepy, as its owner wanted, but it did not scare Cedric himself at all. Hitting the horse with a whip, he made the animal become completely unbalanced. But along with that, Cedric's look has also become too predictable. So in a moment, an artery of blood appeared between the animal and the boy. After which, the animal fell breathlessly on the stone floor, shocking the two men who were already behind Brian. The boy considered it the fault of the owner of the animals, because he was so responsible for what he did not follow up on the second death. Not even wanting to end the conversation with Cedric in the usual way, Brian immediately rushed in the opposite direction from the boy, starting to look for his mother. At first, Cedric presented a knife to the man's throat, and now he dared to take the next step. He began to defend himself, claiming that it was also dangerous for him, which caused Ariel to feel a wave of pity for herself, because she, based on the fact that the boy in front of him was still a child, decided to feel sorry for him. She confirmed that the boy was indeed right, as he should have protected his life by attacking first. But still, he learned a lesson from this situation, for he was unaware that he had better withdraw before removing the dagger from the victim if he did not wish to experience the fountain of red liquid again. And now, when the girl had an instructive conversation with the cruel child, she had to get rid of the dirt on her clothes and body. Although she fully understood that Cedric had problems with character and behavior, she wished that these negative factors did not spread to her in any way. It was a good thing that the girl also had Daniel's clothes, because at worst, she would have forced Cedric to walk around in a single towel. As she continued to wipe his hair, she was truly outraged, because no one really cared that a child was walking around the palace covered in blood. He explained that his servants are quite busy, so all matters concerning him always go to the 10th plan. Continuing to listen to the lecture, Ariel, about the fact that the servants are only deceiving him, he completely forgot about the tree that looked at him through the window. He returned to it, informing him that he was all right, and apologized for causing the tree worry. Before the boy's death, the boy's mother warned him that in the end, people with ulterior motives would be attracted to the boy. She warned that no one would do anything for him just like that, so he was told to be very vigilant. I agreed with this statement, because Cedric's mother was worried about the time when he would be alone. Mother left traces of her upbringing in all aspects of the problems that Cedric must face after her death. She explained every point that her son should pay special attention to in order not to collide with the icy human heart. It was the only way for him to be able to hold on to adulthood, but in all of this, one really forgets what he feels in the process. It was clear that she always said all this with understanding and kindness in her voice. All this time, she could only talk to him with tears in her eyes, so most likely, even after her own death, she could not worry about him. It would have been much easier if his personality had been simple and straightforward, but he was born a man who could raise doubts in the souls of even the most indifferent people. Not following her train of thought, Ariel lost control of what exactly she could say out loud, thus accidentally calling the boy in front of her handsome. Quickly reacting to this, he asked the girl about the content of her words, which she was able to confirm. But unexpectedly, in response to her small compliment, she heard that Cedric was used to hearing from people that they thought he was scary. Thinking back to the picture she saw in front of her relatively recently, she realized that for some people, indeed, a child with a dagger and covered in blood is quite creepy. In a moment, she didn't make herself wait for the boy's words either, but he called Ariel also beautiful, at which a quiet laugh rang out from her lips. But in a moment, he dispelled all her false thoughts, asserting that it was not about her face. He drew attention to her colored aura around her body, calling her beautiful. He was able to see such colors only in the girl's aura. There was red in a small amount, in a correspondingly large amount, and a large green star shone above the girl herself. The fact that he could see the aura with his own eyes, and also clearly distinguish all its colors, only indicated that Cedric had magical eyes, which became the mark of a great sorcerer. The girl grabbed the boy, stopping his meal, as her interest exceeded normal limits. Going outside, she also took a book with her to show it to the boy. Ariel instructed him to memorize the shape of the circle and combine the colors in the same sequence. He looked quite confused, as he didn't quite understand the language. And then Ariel told him to simply connect the small red dot with the green one, then add the magic. Thus, if he can see the magic lines, then he will have to go the hard way, learning the theory. It will only be enough to connect several dots in front of your eyes and build a magic circle. The beginning of his efforts really looked like a professional sorcerer, because on the first try he was able to build a magic circle. In Cedric's eyes, this magic seemed amazing, while Ariel was in shock that by connecting only 2 dots, the boy was able to achieve such an effect. Time passed quickly enough, and without even noticing around the boy, a real storm of red fire appeared. He could not understand how he was able to do it, while the girl herself was trying to understand how he managed to do it. A magic circle of fire could only be created by sorcerers who reached a minimum of medium level. In turn, Cedric did it only by connecting 2 points. In addition to being surprised, the girl also felt something sharp on her shoulder, similar to the finger of a monster tree. Looking around, she already wanted to make sure of her guesses. Later, they were confirmed. However, she could not predict that the tree was asking for help at that moment, because the fire magic made it burn. Starting to scream loudly, Ariel ordered the boy to use magic as soon as possible to save the tree. He was a quick learner, so on his first try, he managed to get the magic water circle going, which he sent towards the burning tree and the girl, moving them into a water hurricane. The hurricane stopped, but the tree and the girl looked confused and wet. Cedric noted that he was able to repeat the drawing from the book, after which the magic circle appeared by itself. Even without knowing what the matter was, the girl could not help but recognize Cedric as a real magical genius. She considered it a real fate to meet a sorcerer with such a powerful potential in a forest closed to outsiders by fate. This was the beginning of Ariel becoming too greedy. Her desire to grow a huge talent was gaining momentum. Only one wrong choice, which she should not have made, became the reason for irreversible consequences. All that time she continued to hesitate because an angel and a demon were sitting on her shoulders, one of which claimed that it would take a long time to correct the boy's character. Another inhabitant of the shoulders, Ariel, considered Cedric's character unimportant because it was enough to make the boy a strong wizard. Time passed very slowly within the forest, so if Cedric stayed for a long time, his development would be much slower. But at the same time, the main thing was that in the end he would grow up, and these 10-15 years would be spent on his studies. The convictions of both parties were more than valid, but the girl herself was not at all embarrassed by this. Some said that people with black hair were never grateful, but Cedric's head shone brighter than the sun. It was this head that brought the girl out of stormy thoughts about the future fate of the boy. He heard mumbling from the girl's side as well, so he decided to ask what exactly she was hesitating about. But having decided to transfer responsibility for the future to herself, Ariel already asked Cedric if he wanted to learn magic from her. Even then, the girl could have assumed that such a decision would have all the consequences, but now she took such a risk due to insufficient mental judgment. In the end, the devil on one of Ariel's shoulders won when she told Cedric that with the help of magic, he could beat Brian. She was full of enthusiasm, so she eagerly awaited a positive response from the boy in front of her. In the end, he agreed, based on the fact that it was Ariel's wish. The verdict on Brian remained the same, because in his opinion, he would still continue to resist. Quickly disappearing from the boy's sight, Ariel began to approach her cabin, yelling at him that next time she would find him a book according to his mental abilities. She entered the process so strongly that in her hands, little by little, a whole stack of enough books began to gather. But they still had to start with a fairly simple one prepared by Ariel. Opening the page, the boy began to look at the symbols he saw in front of him, but he did not understand anything at all. He told the girl that it looked unfamiliar to him, although he had read it before. It must have looked rather strange, because the little prince still remained a resident of the house, so he, judging by everything, had to be taught literacy. He told the girl about the tutors who were there before his mother's death, who after that event simply dissolved into thin air. The matter again concerned his position in the family, which did not even involve regular schooling, a way to abuse a child and make him a useless adult. The whole family keeps Cedric on short notice so he can't escape as an adult. After she finished muttering under her breath about how she was supposed to ruin the plan, her voice rose and she announced that she and Cedric would study hard so that he would become a highly advanced mage. She left the boy alone again, telling him that she had to go down to her library again to find a basic book to learn letters from. When Ariel left the room, the boy, as if addressing himself, said that learning an ancient language that was 1,000 years old would be much more fun than learning modern letters. Looking around her rather large shelves, the girl could not remember if there was anything basic among all these books. Eventually, her eyes fell on one of the rather thick books she had chosen for her first lesson. It was full of pictures, to put in the head of little Cedric, at least some knowledge. Talking to herself, Ariel thanked Daniel for paying attention, even to the subtleties of a magical laboratory. Her conversation with herself was overheard by little Cedric, who asked a question about the identity of this Daniel. He heard the stranger's name for the second time, but he still did not know the story that was connected with him. The first thing that crossed his mind was that there was someone else living in this hut besides the girl he already knew, Ariel. But in a moment she refuted his assumption, saying that her house belonged to her only for a long time. Looking around, Cedric scanned the shelves of books that Ariel didn't usually read. She promised to give the boy permission to read the other one as soon as they were done with the main one. In her plans, she should have given permission to read any books that the boy was not likely to encounter from the outside. As Ariel had guessed, the first thing they started with was a picture book in an ancient language. The time of their study affected a very long time, and thus, outside the window, the trees were covered with snow. Cedric studied with success, and this was definitely the merit of the girl. By now, he already knew a large number of letters, so they could easily move on to magic. But before starting to learn magic, Cedric asked the girl if it is not enough to simply memorize magic circles that others cannot see. She claimed that such was only intended for superficial magic, which they did not aspire to at all. In order to consciously use magic, the boy had to know the theory, because there is a huge difference between the principles, which Cedric should feel with his own experience. Their last lesson on the basics had already come to an end, so the boy was free to go home. But before he left the girl's hut completely, she decided to give him a book full of common magic circles for him to read at his leisure. He was stunned that the girl could so easily give him such an important book. But Ariel herself did not see any problem in this, because it was she who wanted the best education for him. Appreciating this gift very much, the boy wrapped his arms around it, holding it tightly to himself. The first thing that caught his eye was the interesting cover, which was full of details. He was thrilled with how good his first book was. As soon as he returned to the apartment and crawled under the covers, the boy began to look at the drawings, with the help of which he could understand how to increase the power. He also turned his attention to the ancient symbols that belonged to the kingdom of Arendelle. He couldn't sense the magical power that was hidden within Ariel, yet she had profound knowledge that was enough to teach others. She spent her whole life sleeping in the middle of a forest that was full of magic, and also had the opportunity to peacefully exist with monsters by her side, understanding the ancient inscriptions. All this raised the question of who exactly Ariel was, because she never told her story. The more the little prince learns about her, the more curious he becomes. Perhaps his usual interest is developing into the curiosity his mother spoke of. When a bright echo hung behind the window glass, the door to his bedroom quietly opened. The unknown entered the middle of the room, watching the sleeping boy in front of him, next to whom the mysterious book continued to lie. A smile, barely visible in the darkness, appeared on his face, the breakthrough of which he imperceptibly disappeared. The sun took its place in the sky, but the little prince soon opened his eyes. Weakness after yesterday's rather strenuous day, everything felt in his body. It also combined with the fact that the boy felt quite sleepy due to his desire to learn more from the pages of the book. Looking around him, he could no longer find the same beautiful book that he had left in his arms yesterday as he drifted off to sleep. Pacing the corridor in search of the servant, Cedric was already planning to question him because he was the one in charge of his room. But he was suddenly stopped by a picture he saw right on the other side of the corridor. The person in charge of Cedric's room held out a book to Brian's hands, which, according to the same prince, his half-brother had stolen. Quickly recognizing the familiar gem on the book's front cover, Cedric realized that it was Ariel's gift. Even if he looked harmless enough, it meant that a tense atmosphere did not begin to appear around his physical body. Noticing this, Brian wondered what he could do now. After his half-brother took revenge on him by killing the second horse without even blinking an eye. Rushing quickly in the opposite direction from the creepy Cedric, Brian still tightly held his book in his hands. Trying to sneak away from the same boy who was now capable of more than murder, the servant began to approach in the other direction. But suddenly, he was stopped by the same voice that asked him to stop. In a moment, their dialogue attracted the attention of the knight who was wandering along the corridor. Approaching closer and closer to Cedric, the man asked about the situation. The boy accused the servant of stealing things from members of the imperial family. The knight announced that he would deal with this situation by giving the servant hard work. But Cedric stopped him, offering a completely different solution to this situation. According to the rules, which had been agreed upon many years before, anyone who dared to steal a thing from a member of the imperial family would have 2 hands taken away. "Knight, fulfill this rule right now." The man refused, relying on the fact that this law has already expired. But then, there was a look from Cedric's side that left the man with nothing but to obediently carry out the assignment. Kneeling in front of Cedric, the servant continued to assert that this order came from the lips of His Highness Brian. But he was of no use here. But after that, there was nothing left but to fulfill his duty, protecting the interests of the imperial family. A drop or several of blood landed on the little prince's cheek, which made the same knight alarmed, but Cedric himself assured that everything was normal. Watching this, the maids were horrified that Cedric was acting so creepy. It seemed that they didn't even try to hide their dialogue from the mouth of the boy himself, calling him different compared to normal people. His actions didn't make him wait, so he reacted very quickly, turning his murderous glare towards the maids. They engaged in fear as he continued to walk forward, pondering how he was going to retrieve the book. From birth, he was not like other children, so such conversations were not the first for him. His emotions were almost imperceptible, and the concept of morality remained something unknown to him. His mother, who tried to keep her attention on the surrounding environment, always worried that the boy, her son, would be distant from ordinary people because of his differences. That's why she tried to teach Cedric to do normal things, like communicating with animals that can't express their feelings in words, to destroy that boundary of the boy in comparison with others, talking about other ways of showing emotions. So without even thinking about it, the boy tried to repeat the newly learned actions towards his mother. In general, he thought cats were strange because they were small and completely covered in fur. But this strangeness was also the main feature, why they are considered cute. And in order to tell them about it, you just need to stroke them. Following the same example, the boy also asked about the flowers, which were small and soft. According to the logic his mother had just given, he should have followed this way of communicating with them as well. But after his mother informed him that such behavior towards flowers was not usual, the boy said that for him there was no difference between the two. All this led the woman to think that her child had a long and troublesome journey ahead of her. But on the way to the estate, when they passed by the bench on which they met the cat, they noticed only its body. According to the woman's assumption, the cat accidentally jumped onto the road, after which it was run over by a horse. According to the allegations, his mother told Cedric, he crouched closer to the cat. He began to draw one of his hands to the cat's body in order to pet her as an affirmation of love. But his mother stopped his hand, informing him that there is also an exception for this case. Since they both found the cat already dead, they had to bury it and mourn it. The boy did not quite understand the concept of feeling sad, but the only thing he knew for sure was that flowers and cats were beautiful. So, he decided to choose flowers as the last gift that sent the cat on a better path. Although today's events were quite tragic, they became a rather good lesson in relation to the upbringing of humanity in Cedric. Maybe he still didn't quite understand, but with time he will learn to perceive even more emotions. Even the fact that Cedric was significantly different from other children did not prevent his mother from still trying to teach him all the rules of life. But all these words of warning and admonition came from her lips for the last time, before she closed forever her eyes, which were filled with pity. She wanted her son to one day feel real emotions for a special person, and value her so much that he became greedy. After that, the whole world before the eyes of the little prince seemed completely gray. Even bright clothes at all events seemed completely lifeless. The boy was not interested in anything, but he was not happy about anything either. His walks were always filled with thoughts about his values, what he might want in his life. But during one of the rather long walks, he was able to find something that was at least slightly different from the gray picture before his eyes. His curiosity played into his hand as he entered the middle of this circle. In an abandoned part of the palace garden, where no one goes at all, he was able to find a magic circle in which was sealed the magic of Ashield, which was often found in artifacts. All the particles of magic that he felt around him, little by little, began to be drawn into this circle, until he completely disappeared from the abandoned garden. Unknown to him, he moved to a forest he had never seen before. It was strange that the circle was activated by the boy's magical energy, but it was still interesting to him that it was able to work. As he began exploring the forest, he found a house right in the middle of it that didn't look abandoned. Pushing the large door in front of him, the boy was able to get inside, observing a large bed and a sleeping girl right in front of him. Even to his own surprise, colors began to appear right above her head. For Cedric, the world was always gray, and only the magic dots could be different, until he met Ariel, who was completely different from other people. As he crept closer and closer, the boy realized that her sleep was much deeper than he could have imagined. Finally, he was able to call something really beautiful, which also had such a bright shell. Looking at her, he wanted to see how the magic dots would move when she woke up. I would like to see her eyes, or rather their color. So he decided to take one of the chairs that caught his eye and sit right next to her bed, starting to wait. There was a strange feeling of waiting for him, because he was not just waiting, but waiting with excessive interest. But when the sun disappeared from the sky, there was darkness, and the interested smile disappeared from his face. It was a wonder to him that she could sleep for so long, so he assumed she was overtired. After that, the options of how to wake her up began to appear in his head, and the first one was a rather large stone that was supposed to fall on her head. But already holding a large stone above his head and about to drop it, freeing his hands, the boy stopped. His mind was changed by his mother, who warned against the emergence of such ideas, coming to terms with it, throwing the stone aside, deciding to go home. Time passed, and the boy visited Ariel again through the magic circle. The only thing he was interested in right now was whether the girl had woken up yet. But suddenly, his path was stopped by one of the monster trees, which almost touched his shoulder. The boy's reaction made him wait, so he turned sharply behind him, beginning to examine the tree with his eyes. He was quickly able to turn to the monster tree, asking if it wanted to ask him something. Deep in the forest, sharp thorny vines began to appear in front of the boy, which were shrouded in mist. This helped him quickly identify his location, according to the rumors of the eastern forest. Ashild's magic that gave this forest such a glow. But even comparing the relics of this family he saw in the palace where they weren't even close compared to what he saw at the moment. He was overwhelmed with questions, so he decided to turn to the first living thing that caught his eye. He was interested in whether his real life, as well as the life of the forest, was the work of Ashild. He wondered if the sleeping girl he saw in the house was the same witch. But based on the fact that Cedric couldn't sense magic in Ariel's sleeping body, it wasn't there at all. His thoughts really hurt, full of thoughts, because he tried to put together everything he could see during the last time. But in a moment, the puzzle in his head really came together, and turning to the magic tree, he said that he had already seen something similar. It all reminded of the fairy tale his mother read to Cedric. Everything was repeated exactly. A forest full of monsters, in which there is a sleeping princess and a prince who had to defeat the monsters and save her. With a plan for the boy to wake up the girl, he quickly said goodbye to the monster tree as he approached her hut. Cedric's face once again had a rather noticeable smile that he hadn't seen since he first walked into this house. Leaning a little closer, he gave her one kiss on the forehead, hoping for her to wake up soon. But when the ritual, which was supposed to make the girl wake up, all that did not work, the little prince continued to wait. But eventually, his patience gave way when he waited the amount of time and the girl still did not open her eyes. This could lead the boy to think that the girl in front of him was not a princess, but an ordinary witch. It was then that a brilliant, as it seemed to him, idea came to his mind, to try to wake up the girl with the help of a dagger. Even as he held the blade in his hands, he thought of not swinging too hard for his strike, because the blade was quite sharp. His plan really worked, because the girl, with the rest, opened her eyes. However, the boy himself did not even think about the consequences of his own actions, because his only task was to wake up the girl. The only thing that pleased him was that he was able to find out the true color of Ariel's eyes, which were a deep gold. It was then that he was able to remember the words that, "Someday a person will appear in his life who will be so dear to Cedric that he will become greedy." The peace and quiet in Ariel's hut was again destroyed by Cedric, who suddenly appeared in her living room. She wasn't at all surprised to wonder if she had some magical way to get rid of the smell of blood, but she was more interested in why the boy would be interested in it. The case was again Brian, or rather, his servant, who stole the book recently given to Ariel's boyfriend. When the girl told Cedric to forget about that book, could she easily find another basic textbook? Sadness appeared on his face. He treasured the first gift Ariel gave him, but he didn't want to share it with others. The boy had almost nothing anyway, but he didn't want anything, so he considered it almost his duty to have at least such things. Even the fact that the textbook was currently in Brian's hands did not prevent Cedric from cutting off the servant's hands as punishment. At the time when he was already expecting a punishment from the girl's lips about the fact that he behaved too cruelly towards others, her actions did not leave him waiting. Something was strange for him compared to others who could only be afraid. The girl was even able to praise Cedric. It was unacceptable for her that the boy tolerated insults in his direction, so he had to pay off his offenders with the same coin. Having once again praised the boy for his ability to defend himself, the girl next offered to move on to wiping off the blood. Remembering the events that happened before, the boy had always assumed that the girl was afraid of him, but it turned out that she was just being cautious and saw no point in worrying again as long as the boy remained gentle towards her. During the same conversation with the boy, the girl was simultaneously looking for soap with herbs, which should remove the smell along with the heels. Cedric was fine too, until everything that belonged to him was taken from him, and Ariel was the one he wanted to take from the first day she opened her eyes. Eventually, the girl was able to find the soap I was looking for, and that meant it was time to wash. Cedric liked this strange forest experience, because there was no one in it, no one could take Ariel away. From the moment she opened her eyes, she was responsible for attracting the attention of the prince, who had nothing and wanted nothing, so she couldn't take it from him either. Meanwhile, among the magic tower of the imperial palace, there were rumors about an unknown book that was full of mysterious magic circles. None of those present could even assume that such ordinary forms of circles exist in the universe, and moreover, work. This book was found with Prince Brian, but from the very beginning, before it got into his hands, it was Cedric. Lately, Cedric had indeed spent a lot of time wandering in an unknown direction, but the thought that the boy had found an unknown ruin could not be true. But then they wondered where he had found this, and who could give such a valuable gift to a prince without power. When the unknown white-haired boy heard about this conversation, he immediately set off in an unknown direction, because he did not consider this situation to be like an ordinary one. Entering the room, he saw in front of him a turquoise armchair, which was directed towards the window, and turning to it, he was able to prove that he did not come empty-handed. Ansel Price was the second son of his family, an apprentice chamberlain of the imperial palace. He acted as an informant for the truth investigators. He added that upon examining the book, he discovered that it belonged to a kingdom that disappeared 1,000 years ago. The first grader of this book, judging by all the rumors, was Prince Cedric. Now that he knew all the details, he had to follow the owner of the book without being noticed. Carrying out his usual routine, the same Prince Cedric was walking through the large garden that was located within the palace. All the time he was quite alert, as his mother had taught him, so he could not fail to notice someone's presence. Turning his head in the direction of the noise, he was able to spot two unknown cloaked figures hiding behind some large bushes. They continued to cheer each other on, claiming to be unnoticed while the little prince continued to keep his eyes on them. But hiding so tightly behind the bushes, they also found not the most convenient position in relation to themselves, so they could not carefully observe all the actions of the boy. Thus, emerging a little from behind the bushes, they were able to see the same face from which they tried so hard to hide. They did not last long there. Very soon they ran out of those bushes like rats, starting to move in an unknown direction. From just one look, it was clear to the boy that the wizards of the tower were watching over him, but they were doing it too carelessly. It was clear to him that it was about the book Ariel, but at the same time, she attracted Brian to this situation, who was very annoyed that the wizards of the tower took Cedric's thing from him. The boy could not move to the forest as before, because now the eyes of the tower mages were watching him everywhere. Approaching the same circle he always teleported through to the eastern forest, Cedric continued to think about remaining invisible. But hearing a noise coming from the bushes, the boy turned his head again. Surprisingly, there was nothing in the place where he was looking, although he was sure that someone was there. This confidence gave him the ability to calmly teleport through magic to a mysterious forest. Although the boy's subconscious was actually right, he was wrong. Behind the tree remained hidden Ansel, who was almost not noticed due to the wizards of the tower, who were too annoying. Showing himself completely behind the trees, he began to examine the magic circle, which, judging by everything, was left by the relic of Ashild. Looking at the same magic circle already from a fairly close distance, it was interesting for him where exactly Cedric was headed. When the boy himself was near the hut, Ariel called out to her. He apologized to the girl for not appearing for the past 2 weeks and explained the situation, telling the girl that he had been followed. In any case, it was a bit difficult for the girl to discern the effects of time while within the confines of the forest. The excessive looks from the wizards of the tower, who were keeping a close eye on him, annoyed him, but he would have liked them to be at least more inconspicuous. As soon as the girl heard from Cedric about the wizards of the tower, confirmation that they still lack social skills appeared in her head again. After all, these observations did not have good reasons behind them. After all, if in the process of surveillance and investigation, others can find this forest, then the girl will definitely have problems. Therefore, the girl offered the boy to learn one magic print that will help him cover all traces. Drawing mysterious symbols on the floor, the girl spoke words. Cedric repeated the same symbols in the air. He depicted exactly the same triangle. In an instant, his physical shell began to disappear near the monster tree, much to his dismay. But suddenly appearing behind him, The boy laughed loudly, announcing that now he would be able to sneak out of the house without being noticed. Also, Ariel said that she would give another book to the boy, from which he could study if he could not visit her. The time spent in the forest became their shared secret, from the very beginning, when the boy found the magic circle. During active classes, Ariel herself even noticed how much fun she had living with Cedric within the confines of this forest. In the fall, they played music with magic and danced to it. In winter, they filled the room with tangerines and ate them continuously, distracted from time to time to look into the small window behind which the snowfall was falling. In the spring, they used magic to grow fruit and berries, which they later harvested. And the summer for the two of them was meant to be enjoyed by the magic of water that helped keep them cool. Thus, the year passed inconspicuously as they passed through different seasons. Even the trees are monsters, because they started to get a little attached to the boy, waiting for his arrival. But they were quickly found by Ariel, thus breaking their expectations. The girl was against the fact that they were overly attached to a person from the outside world, because she could disappear in the blink of an eye. For those who have lived hundreds or thousands of years of their lives, an ordinary boy will become only a fleeting memory. But even if Ariel thought about it, it didn't stop Cedric himself from coming every time she was left alone for a long time. He was her little pupil, to whom she herself became attached very quickly, despite all his inclinations towards the trees. Time did pass, but Ariel never had time to sing along. As expected, under the influence of the time of the outside world, Cedric grew up. Clothes that used to look more than big on Cedric now fit perfectly. He said that the shirt he was wearing now was in a room that Ariel hadn't used in a long time. His memory quickly recalled a familiar pattern from childhood. The girl's eyes noticeably rounded when she heard the answer to the question about age in the number 15. She couldn't figure out how the same little Cedric, who barely climbed the monster trees, was already almost taller than Ariel. However, the girl was able to quickly bite him. He wanted to look taller due to the fact that he stood up on his tiptoes, to the point that he promised that very soon he should become even taller, already driving the girl for sure. Even having the opportunity to see with her own eyes, all this remained quite strange for the girl. Cedric spent a lot of time in the forest, so he had to lag behind his peers in height by a couple of years. But even without looking at these rather influential factors, he still grew up and looked like his 15 years. It was as if he was simply not affected by the time-stopping magic of this forest. Approaching the magic circle, the girl did not stop her thoughts. Her solitude was disturbed by one of the tree monsters sneaking up behind her. She admitted that she really doesn't know how to behave in this situation. Time must have moved very slowly for all the creatures in the middle of the forest. But Cedric was breaking those rules, which indicated that his magical power was far more advanced than the one the girl sealed the forest with. He was still young and unable to reach his full potential, but if he practices away and still learns to use his power to its full potential, then he will be able to destroy the seal of the forest. Due to this, the gates of dimensions will open again, and Arcelle will have to return to the battlefield again. For herself personally, she promised that she would never allow this in her life and stop Cedric in any way possible. Entering the center of the magic circle, the boy was surprised that it did not move him to the forest. Magical power was being transmitted, but the circle itself for some reason did not want to start. It felt like someone was blocking the flow from the other side. So if this circle is working, then the problem was the magic of the forest with what happened on the other side. Turning to Ariel across the circle, Cedric tried to find out exactly what had happened, what had caused it. Being on the other side of the magic circle, the girl did not have enough strength to seal it completely. She could only intervene in the flow to block the movement. Cedric's voice coming from that direction all the while. It could also be heard by other creatures that were near the circle. But Ariel couldn't call it a problem or something out of the ordinary. After all, from the very beginning, she was sure that Cedric would have to leave this forest one day. Entering her house, the girl felt how empty it was. Such sensations did not arise in her for quite a long time, because she was used to them. It was just one moment that took the girl away from the events that were happening in her ordinary life. But now everything was in order, and she could forget about it all. To begin with, she decided to clear the table of extra books and more unnecessary items before starting her routine. After him, the guy left a real mess in the form of abandoned dishes and scattered things, which were left by Cedric in the confines of Ariel's house, formerly belonging to Daniel. But during the thorough cleaning of all the mess, including the things themselves, the girl found a bright hair that shone on the carpet. It was like gold both in luster and color. But of course there was no lock of hair on this carpet, and very soon the girl had to see the rest. This behavior was similar to that of a dog, as in addition to growing extremely fast, Cedric had also shed his previous fur. Cleaning up the usual things that the girl could reach was finished, and she picked up a broom to move on to getting rid of the remaining traces. Perhaps the main purpose of this cleaning was not to get rid of the extra mess, to which she was already quite accustomed. As if convincing herself, she claimed that very soon everything would return to normal. Cedric had to give up very soon, as this place no longer had any of the entertainment that the little prince had found in his childhood. But after thoughts began to subside under the sound of a broom, the girl felt a sudden weakness throughout her body. This was one of the first signs that she would soon fall into a deep sleep. Deciding to finish cleaning, the girl hoped that the cleaning spell would work properly, and once she woke up, all traces of Cedric would disappear on their own. She went to bed thinking that she would wake up in a few years, just when Cedric would be able to forget everything. The approach of Ariel's deep sleep brought with it a rather large wave of powerful rain. However, Cedric was not the kind of person who could be stopped by ordinary rain. He continued to sit in the center of the magic circle and call out to Ariel incessantly. Soon rumors began to circulate throughout the imperial palace among the maids that Prince Cedric had lost his mind. Some say that he does not leave the garden, which is located at the edge of the palace grounds. But even the maid herself heard that he spends almost all his time there, constantly calling someone. Their conversation was interrupted by the appearance of Prince Cedric himself, who was standing in the middle of the path near the palace. His look looked unhealthy. He was staring at one point, hardly blinking his eyes. As he walked forward, he kept drumming under his breath, wondering what he had to do to see Ariel again. His complete absence from reality led him to encounter an unknown man on his way. Stopping Cedric in his tracks, Ansel apologized for the collision, asking him if everything was okay. Feeling a stranger's hands on his forearm, Cedric could do nothing but look in the stranger's direction, his gaze completely down, commanding him to let him go. In a moment, he himself was able to escape from someone else's hands, continuing his movement in an unknown direction. Looking back at the boy walking up the stairs, completely detached from reality, Ansel couldn't even imagine how bad things were. This prompted the man to try a different approach. Cedric was in chaos as he tried to find information in the textbooks. Continuing to mumble under his breath, he quickly flipped through the pages of the books, trying to find information about the monster forest, witches, or the curse of time. But the information was still not enough, and the boy could not make his way to the other side of the forest without a magic circle. His eyes instantly fell on these books that he had just been tossing in a random direction. Suddenly, a moment appeared in his memories that was connected with the same books. Ariel gave them to the boy in order for him to deepen his knowledge, paying attention to the fact that they were very valuable. So he had to take good care of them. Even at that time, he did not understand why the girl gave him such a huge hearth when he could choose one at a time. She informed that these books were as homework because the girl will be busy in the near future. So, in order not to waste time, the boy had to memorize the circles depicted on those pages. Looking at all the pages that had pictures of those circles on them, Cedric remembered how hard Ariel had told him to try during his independent studies. All this could not help but lead the boy to think that the girl was developing this plan in order to specifically block the circle so that he could not come. But even so, Cedric wasn't going to stop, and was going to find another way to get into the forest without using the circle. Cedric sat behind thick and not very good books until the night, until the moonlight filled the room. By the end of the day, there was almost no energy left, and he fell asleep without getting up from his chair. The maids had to wait for the moment to enter the sleeping prince's room and clean up quietly. Closely following the boy's sleep, they continued to walk towards the contaminated objects. It was also not without the fact that one of the maids was able to touch one of several dozen books. Most likely, she could not have imagined that someone else's hand, which appeared out of nowhere, could stop her. Cedric had already had a not-so-pleasant experience with a servant touching his things, which the boy was not going to repeat again. But for the last time, before the two maids left the boy's room with horror on their faces, he did what he did, ordering both of them to sweep until he chopped off their hands. Both of them were afraid to enter that room again. But they could not leave it untidy either. One of them could only assume that she would be left without a hand, because at the moment it was unclear to anyone what was going on in the bright head of His Highness. Rumors about the prince's stupidity were gaining momentum every day, and there was no point in denying them. No one could even guess what the careless actions of the servants in the confines of his room and in relation to his belongings meant. But even for him, the question of why Ariel betrayed him, leaving him abandoned, remained a real mystery.